Mr. Tyler, we got
What?
we got a doozy today.
A doozy?
Doozy. This gentleman, this kid is
I feel like I've gotten in trouble for calling people kids before.
well, no, you got in trouble for calling your kids assholes.
I got in trouble for that. I got in trouble for calling women girls, and I got in trouble at one of our presentations. I think it was when we spoke somewhere and we spoke to a classroom. Might have been at like one of the Cape Cod events, and we said like kids to the high school kids, and this guy came up to me afterwards and was like, these young men and women probably don't appreciate being called kids. And I was like, damn, man, sorry.
Well, guess
Won't
what,
do it
Tyler?
ever again.
This is our podcast, and we can do whatever we want.
Screw that guy.
He is someone that has a lot of talents and started very young. He grew up here locally in Massachusetts. I've gotten to know him. He's visited some of my job sites. He actually came to the Contractor Coalition Summit in Scottsdale. Ethan Eckstrom. And, he has an interesting start to what we'll learn in the podcast, an interesting start to this industry. But I know a lot of you guys are going to relate to his start, because I feel like the more and more people I talk to, and you ask, how did you get into this? You get the eye roll, and it's like, well, man, I've been doing this since I was a kid. Well, Ethan gives you an inside look at. Did I say Yeah, I said Ethan. I thought I said Ethan for a second. Ethan gives you an inside look into how he got into this industry and just how early his life started in construction and architecture.
Yeah, it was good to meet Ethan. Obviously, he's local to you, but he did surprise me, being that he was only 23, the way he carries himself, his portfolio, what he's doing, just his overall demeanor. But it's a very easy age for me to relate to or compare to, because I started my business when I was 23. And it was not doing anything close to what Ethan's doing. So he definitely has a jump start on things. So for any of you young contractors out there, people who want to be doing this, it's going to be a good listen for you. And I think it'll be a pretty good perspective to where you can be with some hard work and some dedication, and really being committed to following with the path that you want to be on.
Speaking of being committed, he shares an interesting insight as to how he continues to educate himself within the industry and further, bettering his product. So stay tuned for that. Are you ready to elevate your projects with exceptional craftsmanship? Well, let me introduce you to two of Andersen's standout big door products, the lift slide door and the pivot door.
The lift slide door is a versatile door that comes in aluminum, wood clad, all aluminum or all wood construction, and can be designed to fit curves and corners seamlessly. Plus, it features an integrated insect screen to keep those bugs at bay. Every lift slide door is rigorously tested before shipping. It could be both, vigorously and rigorously tested before shipping, ensuring top-notch quality upon arrival.
I hope legal doesn't have an issue with that. It's like, no, it's not vigorously. It's only rigorously.
It's just rigorous.
And
it won't survive the rigorous, just the vigorous.
And the pivot door is a true statement piece. The door can be up to 9 feet wide and 16 feet tall. And with both custom and standard sizes available, it's perfect for creating a grand, modern entrance.
And don't worry about installation. Andersen's experts are ready to assist with any install questions you may have.
So choose Andersen for your big door needs and experience a difference in quality and support. Visit Andersen's website today to learn more about their lift slide and pivot doors. Are you still running your construction company the traditional way, with notepads and pencils, sticky notes, paper checks, running all around town getting signatures, job updates, and payments? Well, if so, you should listen up.
Construction management software gives builders like you a new way to plan your jobs efficiently, collaborate with team members, clients, and subs, increase revenue and profit margins, and run your entire business from the palm of your hand.
I like that little pause there. It really had me wondering what you were about to say. What is the
That was
life
the
changing?
intent.
What's this life changing tech? Well, it's Buildertrend, the premier platform for premier builders. Their software is built for builders looking to streamline their processes, builders who want to go from 6 to 8 figures, and builders looking to perfect production timelines.
It's built for you. Visit buildertrend.com/MC demo to learn more about Buildertrend and schedule a free demo with their team.
Ethan, you got like that old man office.
This is my partner Billy's conference room.
Oh, no offense to Billy. The wood paneling.
Yeah, they
You
get.
need like the leather chair with the
Look at the leather
like-
chairs in the bottom corner right there. Yeah.
yeah, see?
Yeah.
There you go.
What's up, man? How
It
are you?
needs like the arms that have the buttons in them.
They do. I think they do. They definitely have arms.
Yeah, no buttons though.
No.
How's it going?
What's going? Good, man. How are you?
Good.
Congrats on the recent sale. I know that was a big project for you guys to get off your plate, right?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we closed about 3 weeks ago now. And
How was that?
Good. Probably the smoothest transaction that we've had, honestly. We don't do much spec product, but of the handful we've had, there's always, rate locks and fighting for a CO and stuff, but both things went smooth. They only got a mortgage for about 1/3 of the total price, which was, easy for, not needing the rate really. And then, it was actually the first person that saw it. An agent had stopped by and I got a call from a random number and she's like, "Hey, we're over here in the development, can we see it?" And I was heading to Boston and I almost said, like in my mind, I was like, how serious are they?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't go there. So I was just really justifying it in my mind. And I sent over my office manager, Karen. I said, "Can you just meet with these guys?" So she met with them and I'm just like, sell, sell, sell. And they ended up putting in an offer that night and then
That
closed
night?
on. Yeah, they put in an offer that night. And then, closed on it like 30 or 40 days later. So pretty smooth.
No shit.
Although,
It's funny.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I can't help but wonder, like now that it was done, like 40 days later in landscape, like if we had an open house, like maybe we could have got more.
Yeah, I know. I feel like that's always hindsight, right?
Yeah.
I was gonna say at my Builder 20 meeting this past spring, I forget someone asked a question about like the guys that have been doing it a long time if they had any advice for the younger guys, and one of the builders was like, "Don't ever say no." And it reminds me of like you driving to Boston and question like, "Ah, are they serious? Like, should I?" It's almost like, do you want to waste your time going, turning around and meeting with the client? And this guy went on to tell a story about how some random person called him and was like, "Hey, I need my floors refinished." And he's like, "Dude, I build $10 million homes. Like, I don't do floor refinishing." And he's like, and for some reason, I just was like, "I'll help him out," and refinished the floor. And I think he said he went on to do a couple other like random small things, and then years later built like a monster for him. It was like, "Hey, we want to build a house," and it was exactly that. And it's
Right.
it's always that. I think that's always a challenge. It's like, balance, and this ties into the work life balance too. It's like, I got a life. I'm going into Boston. I'm meeting up with my friends, whatever. It's like, do I really want to turn around for a client? Which ultimately ended up, I mean, it worked out in your favor, but
Right. Yeah, no, to your point though, that's something my dad told me too early on, like never discount anybody, because you just never know. And it turned out to be the case. So yeah, no, it was pretty smooth. I'm glad that we could get somebody in. Something that I learned through that process, especially with kind of a more high stakes, higher price point thing than what we usually do. There was so much like obviously speculation. It was a spec house, but there was so many questions of like, what do you think you'll get for it? Or when do you think it'll sell? And I just like was sick of all the questions. Like I was used to kind of like just doing custom stuff where none of that was a question. And especially when, the closing might, put some money back in for overhead and stuff, or change how your year looks. It was good to get some clarity on like what that outcome was going to be. So I'm just glad that we could get somebody, in there and then it wasn't sitting.
When did you start marketing it?
So I kind of was marketing it like on and off on Instagram, like when we closed on the acquisition and when we started demo, which was actually, I think the day after I got back from the Coalition Summit in Scottsdale a little over a year ago. So that's when we closed on it. And then, I had like a logo done for it and a website, just like a property listing page for it. Cause I was going to be the agent as well, cause I had my license. And then, kind of just did the stories and stuff, but didn't put it on the market until it was like framed. But that proved to be a little too early, I think, just because people don't seem to have the vision when it's just the bones of the house. I think they want to see like how it's going to come together and the personality of the finishes. So I ended up relisting it with new photos once all the millwork, floors, tile, everything was done. It was like majority painted, but like the floors weren't finished. And then it was at that point that the people had reached out. I think I had one open house, and again, like the floors weren't finished yet, so there's still like a good amount to do. I think we had one open house. We had a handful of people, but it was mostly like neighbors and people in town. And then these people were out of state and were just in the area. They had grown up nearby, so they came to take a look, and it just worked out.
Was this a spec for you guys?
Yeah, it was. So it was it was an existing house. It was built in the early 1880s, and it was on 16 acres. And a developer in town bought the house probably like 3 years ago now, and then he went through approvals to subdivide the land. And then he basically left this house on one of the lots at the start of the subdivision. And so as soon as he got all the lots released, we bought it off of him. And it was actually on the market for a while. And for some reason, I kept scrolling by it and kind of like writing it off. I don't know why. But one day I sent it to my partner and he was like, yeah, let's take a look at it. And then, put in an offer, and then we grabbed it and then ended up closing in like May of 23. But yeah, it was a spec.
How many other houses are they putting up around it?
It's 20 total.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's kind of tight for Easton. So we're about 30 miles south of Boston. And it's like it's not like farmland rural, but it's definitely, suburban. And it's what's called a flexible development. And it was the second one in town in which they say, if you preserve X amount of open space, you can have no minimum lot size, pretty much no setbacks, no lot coverage, but you have to do 10% affordable. So they're all single family, but 2 of the lots are affordable, meaning they'll go through a lottery process with the state. They have to look the same. All have 2-car garages and front porches and that sort of thing. But, they're a lower price point, so that affects your pro forma, but you get extra lots for it. So I think the consensus in the neighborhood is that it's a bunch of plastic boxes kind of going in. It's not. Yeah, it does. And we can get into it too. But so I also, in addition to the building, I also do like some design and drafting. And I actually knew the developer, and I'm drafting some of the houses, but it's kind of driven by like what he wants to build, which is driven by cost, of course. But the prices are just kind of like going nuts. So people are paying a lot of money for, not that much.
How much land did they have to preserve?
Of the 16 acres, I want to say like maybe 4 or 5 acres got preserved, but it's not like it's going to be used. I think it's for like retention ponds and drainage and that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's just crazy that they were able to put that many houses. I mean, like, I feel like that's a valuable lot if you're able to buy it and put 20 homes on it.
Yeah, I want to say he got it for over $2 million, but I think he'll do well. I mean, now he's selling a quarter-acre lot in there for north of $450, which is kind of because Easton, maybe 5 to 7 to 10 years ago, you bought like an acre lot for like $200.
Yeah.
but there's limited inventory, and it's not to the point like, Needham or Newton yet where it's teardowns, but I think that'll be the case in the near future.
Did the people who purchased your project have any like opposition? I mean, I guess it wasn't a concern for them what was going to get built around them, or like, did you have a fear of that?
A little bit, because although we had like the engineered plans for the subdivision, it was still kind of, it's like what's going to go in the lot behind it and how close.
Yeah.
That was kind of a question that came up. But no, I guess in the end, it wasn't really a concern. And thankfully, we had the second biggest lot in there, and we were at like a little over half an acre, so it was still like a good, decent corner lot with some good privacy. But when I designed the renovation, I kind of centered the living space around like the east facing part of the lot that wasn't going to butt up to another house specifically. And there was, there's an existing tree to the left of the house that kind of like goes over the driveway that we were required to keep, and we would have anyways. And there's also like a 25-foot like no cut buffer along the property line to the other houses too. So, some of those features are good. But yeah, I tried to make it as private as we could.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I see like people not having any issue with that, and then other people that being like a huge turnoff for. Especially like you said, if you can't really control what's going to happen behind you to ensure that you're investing in this new home and moving to this new home, and then it's like, oh God, what the heck did we just move in here for?
Yeah, I agree.
So I grew up next to Easton, so I'm familiar with Easton, and I feel like even since I was a kid, this is how they always built. It would be an older neighborhood that essentially got extended. Like
Right.
you'd have this cul-de-sac, and then all of a sudden they cut a road in and just keep going deeper into the woods. And I remember, and I knew a lot of people that lived in those neighborhoods, and it was just this, every time it was a huge fight.
Right.
To your point, Tyler, it's like, I mean, I think what you're referring to is your neighbor behind you, right? Like that's a great example where it's like you have this beautiful lot of land, you have this beautiful home, and then someone just plugs in behind you and has no regard for what they're building and how it impacts you. And I think
I think even from like a township perspective, too, and I think even the way that the code is written, right? You have to have a code that is general enough to apply to certain areas, but then the way that you actually can instate the code and everything else, like I feel that it should be taken into a case by case basis, even though, and like that's where the tough part is, where it's like you're trying to cover this whole area with these generalizations of code and zoning and what's required, but at the same time, like each lot within a township or within a city is really unique to every lot around it, and I feel that there should be more consideration taken for how old the house was, what the land looks like there, how it's going to impact the environment, and not just be like, well, it fits within the parameters of code.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a good step that they've tried to implement is architectural review. So like when we go through, or when the developer went through the approval for this neighborhood, one of the conditions was architectural review, meaning that when he pulls the permit for each lot, the planning board has to review the plans to make sure it's in keeping with what the vision was for the neighborhood. But that only goes so far, because it's not really any control. It's just a review. Like they have no jurisdiction to say, well, you really should make this more proportional, or you should use this material. They had a little bit more leeway on my house, making sure that we didn't use a vinyl product or composite decking or anything like that. But
they're just suggesting that.
It's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
You know.
So at the end of the day, it's like if the builder wants to do it, there's really no say in it. They can do whatever they want.
It pretty much only prevents, like, if somebody wanted to buy a lot and build like a massive stucco house and everything else is like colonials, it prevents that. But it doesn't, it doesn't enhance it really in any other way, or like protect the fabric of the existing neighborhood that it was built off of, which
Do
is,
you wish
it's
it
kind of,
did?
I do, because
Because
obviously, like from more of
sorry.
a design perspective, um, like I think that we could build a way cooler product, and honestly just probably get a little bit more creative, not even spend that much more money, even if the massing was different and maybe use slightly different materials. I think it would create for like a better feel instead of just like an appendage on an existing neighborhood.
So Nick, I had sent you photos. I came home the one night and like the people who built the house behind us, it literally looks like a high school athletic field. Like there's so many lights in the back. And I'm like, this is just getting absolutely absurd. So I was like, there has to be some sort of zoning in place with the flag lot that you can't just light your lot up however you want. So I emailed the township for the zoning office. I'm like, hey, it's 10:30 at night. I'm like trying to go to sleep and I have like their commercial athletic turf field lights in my backyard at 10:30 at night. And she's like, "Oh, yeah, we don't have any sort of approval in place for any exterior lighting, a turf field or turf lighting." So, not only did the people not get any sort of approvals, they put in like a full athletic turf field without approvals anyway. So, needless to say, they're pissed off that I called to ask zoning about that, but like it wasn't actually my intent to just be like, "Hey, this is back here." It was like, "What?" I was actually bummed with the township because I'm like, you have an agriculturally zoned area. How are there no tighter constraints or stipulations put in place that basically, as long as you're within the zoning regulations, it's like you can do whatever the fuck you want? And to me, that's where the problem lies, where you have all this money going towards taxes, all these people are getting paid, and it's not as though this is like a private development or it's new construct. Like where it is, it you should there's not that many lots like that in this area, in the zoning area of this town, that like it should all be addressed independently of just blanketing everything with like, well, if it's under the setback works and their impervious coverage is good, so you can basically put up whatever the hell you want. And that's where I find there to be an issue and why there aren't tighter regulations in place to prevent. And like if you're building something where it's like, hey, this is all we can afford, right? We're building a small house. Yeah, we don't want to spend all this money and make it fancy. Maybe vinyl siding fits the budget. But if you're building a 9,000 square foot house and then you're going to put vinyl siding on it, like there should be a requirement where it's like build a smaller house and make it fit in or make it be nice. That to me is where like there's a disconnect that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is a shame, and I feel like, at least like with the lights or even noise. Like I've seen some bylaws relating to noise and lights and such. Um, like that's something that should be implemented, in even like a site specific review. Um, I think would go a long way. And the other point too that kind of blows my mind is like, to your point, when people spend all this money. Um, and it is kind of wild, like what they'll put in for, finishes or massing or the design, and it just doesn't fit at all. But it's all like square foot driven and like amenity driven.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it's hard. I mean, this is random. You guys follow the Stradman? He's like a car guy on YouTube.
No,
This guy, like,
No.
literally, his story is
I don't think I
crazy.
follow anyone on YouTube. I didn't know you could do that.
Well, I don't know if I physically follow, like, I don't know if I subscribe to him, but
Yeah.
um, he's got some crazy cars, like a couple $1 million worth of cars, and he like started his career like filming cars, but he just recently built a house, and the house is a monster. And he also has, I can't remember how many, I want to say like a 50 car garage. It's something like absurd where you pull in like you can pull in like 20 cars on the first level, and then he has an elevator to bring in cars to the basement. It's like nuts. And I'm watching him, like he's not doing like construction updates, but he's doing updates of his house being built. And I'm looking in the background, I'm like, man, like it's a big house with a cool ass car elevator, and they're putting vinyl siding on it. And, and it's shit sheathing and roof product. And it's just not it's not a priority for him. And I understand that, but I don't know. I can't say I'm on the same page, or I 100% agree with the architectural review, because I think about, Ethan, you lived in Beacon Hill. Like, I think about Beacon Hill, where like they're super stringent, and I understand why they want everything looking the same. They want to maintain the character and the historic element of it, but there's some rules that are just stupid. And for example, like, you have to use single pane glass, you can't use insulated glass, but then you have to put storm windows on, which they have no regulation of what the storm windows look like. It's like, I mean, these buildings would look significantly nicer if you remove the storm windows and just let a nice wood architectural insulated glass window be let in. And what my understanding is that is a product of people taking advantage or doing it wrong. So instead of having a better process and making sure that stuff was done right, they put this blanket rule on saying no one can do it. And that's my issue with these architectural reviews, is that it becomes, a standard based on, the idiocracy of people that are doing it so poorly. And, and my point in bringing that up is that, the other side of me is like, I agree. Like, it should go through a review. We're building our Wellesley spec. That's not a normal house. If it sat in front of a board and they had an architectural review process on it, we probably wouldn't be building it, because there's just stuff on it that is not quote unquote normal or typical. And they'd be like, I don't understand, how are you hanging brick? And what do you mean it's the same material in the roof? No house has same. So I think we would have had a ton of challenge, but the reality is the process in which we went to get to that product and what it will look like is that it will fit into the neighborhood. It will be, respectful of what's around it. It will just be different. And, I don't know the answer to it, obviously, but I don't know how we get to a point where there is a process that encourages good design without putting us in such a narrow lane of the fact that we're only building one product over and over and over because that's what's safe.
I would like to think that there's a way that they could create a standard where it really takes into account like what that new project or what that renovation, how that bears on the rest of the community and how that impacts the rest of the environment, not as though it's like this standalone independent unit or building, right? It's like, okay, how is this, if this goes in the way that it is, how's that going to impact the neighborhood? How's that going to impact all of the neighbors? If it's just like an aesthetic thing that's an issue, that like that's a judgment call. But I think where it's like the size, the setback, the lighting, all of like the privacy, all of that should be taken into account more so than, hey, we need single pane glass with storm windows on it, because that just doesn't make sense. Like it really should take into account, if you're doing this, how are you going to affect all of your neighbors?
Yeah. And I think, to Nick's point, it's like the difference, I think, is like the intent. And that's tough to judge, obviously, because it's like, yeah, your spec house will be much different, but it's still going to fit into the neighborhood and it's still going to respect its surroundings. But there's a project that I'm drawing now in Hingham, in the engineering has to go. Yeah, Hingham stuff, and it's a tight lot. It's by the water, but the civil engineers have to go through peer review with the planning board over a certain amount of land disturbance. And that's been an interesting thing to be included on, kind of at a distance, because I'm on the emails for it. I did my architectural piece, but of course they're figuring out, how that relates to the grading and the drainage and stuff. But, perhaps if there was a peer review process architecturally, or with the site plan too. I know they kind of do it in Boston, when they go for approvals, like the neighborhood meetings and stuff. And I know developers hate it, but I think it does, yield a better product because you're getting that input. So I don't know.
I mean, that has to create like a better community as well. If you're trying to get into a community or build a house or renovate a house in a community, and it's in line with the rest of the community that's been there and agrees with it, I feel like that's going to be, from a neighbor perspective, somebody who fits in that community versus somebody who just comes in and does whatever the fuck they want and disturbs the community. And now it's like that doesn't really mesh with everyone and everything else that's here. Like, I feel like from a community perspective, that would just make for a healthier community, not just even aesthetically, but just behaviorally.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So how much did you guys have to do with the construction of this spec as well, Ethan?
So we're a GC. So I design. I have a design company, design and drafting of mostly single family homes, but then we're a GC as well. So we do mostly custom home builds for clients. We've done a handful of spec stuff. So I was essentially the super on that project, the super and the PM, and I had some help too from my team. And my partner was the investor on it. So we pretty much did it start to finish. So I, as soon as we got under agreement, or even a little before, I started design. Worked through plans, priced it out, and then permitted it, and then ran it, and then I listed it as well, and then sold it from there.
So is your partner on the design end or the GC end?
Only the GC side.
And which came first, the GC or the design?
The design came first. So I had been designing since like in high school, and then that's kind of how I started to get into construction a little bit, because I did some internships like for builders and stuff during the summers, and then I actually drew an addition in my neighborhood. It was like this older gambrel, and then it was a friend of mine. His dad wanted to like expand it, so I drew the plans for him, and then I think he asked for like a recommendation if I knew any builders, and I said, well, I could price it, and he said, well, the plan's the best. So
this was in high school.
I had just graduated high school. I was like 2 months after graduation. I priced this thing, and it was probably like $140,000 edition, like a small edition. And he was like, well, the plan's the best, so you should price it. And I was like, yeah, that's so true. So I priced it out, got the job, did it. And that was like probably like a 4-month job. And then immediately after that, I started $1 million custom home with a different partner at the time on a lot in Easton. And then from there, it was design and build. But all the while, I was still drawing plans, and that's kind of been like my bread and butter. So yeah.
So did you end up getting an architecture degree, or are you just doing the drafts and then having somebody else do the structurals?
Yeah, the latter is how I'm doing it now. I've been toying with going to school, actually, nights to get my degree. It is a goal of mine to become a registered architect, but right now just an architectural designer. So yeah, I was introduced to a structural engineer probably like 4 years ago. And he basically reviews my plans, calcs all the beams, does all the vertical and horizontal, load calcs, and then stamps it. And then, I mean, most times builders in this area are still sending it to their lumberyard, and maybe at that point they're doing a little bit of value engineering too, as they do the takeoff and stuff. But it's worked well, for like the initial client pool for me was just like spec builders in the area. Really, it's simple colonials and capes and stuff like that. So that method sufficed in terms of subbing out the engineering.
And you feel that there's probably a need to bring that in-house or be able to handle that at some point soon?
Yeah, I go back to when I was in high school. I took an accounting class, and I think that I probably didn't pay attention well, and I was probably working on some drafting stuff. And the teacher, he said, "Hey, I actually have a friend who's an architect. Maybe I can have you meet with him and just pick his brain." So I met with him, and I'll never forget what he said. And he's like, I think it's totally awesome that you want to, draw these, capes and colonials and stuff. Like, that's great. But that's not like what you want to be doing later. Like, you don't want to be like staying on the same path. So like that would be a vote for going to school and getting your degree so you can expand your thinking and kind of apply it to like a wider range of, the profession, I guess. So that's kind of been in the back of my head this whole time. When I finished high school, I applied to a few schools, for architecture and construction management. I was back and forth pretty much daily. I would convince myself that I should go and then convince myself that I should just stay and work and take a gap year. So I ended up taking a year, off, and then that just turned into, just sticking it out and trying to work. And that was 5 years ago now.
So, like, how much do you think your business would change if you were a registered architect right now?
That's an interesting question because I'm sure the workflow would be a lot different. Obviously there's processes that you learn in school and in working for other firms to get your licensure. The thing that I struggle with is like splitting my time between the two, because I want to be really great at both, but it's tough to kind of do that when I'm doing like, call it 25 hours a week on design and 25 hours a week on construction. And I feel that, hey, if I went to school, got my degree, got the experience, and like went all in on architecture, like I could be amazing at that. Or if I just built and went all in on that, I could be amazing at that. So I've always kind of had that struggle. More recently, I've seen some firms that do both, and that's been a good example to see. But I also had a moment of clarity when I don't know where I heard it, but somebody said, the definition of architect is master builder, and that was kind of like a new goal of mine. Like the idea of being a master builder with the architecture piece built in, like that's probably like ideal. It's just a matter of how do I get there?
Yeah. How old are you?
23.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, he's young.
Not that you look older, but I was like, I feel like you were talking as if it was like way too late for you to do this shit. And you're like, you have 18 kids and like 3 mortgages, and you're like, I could never go back to school now. 23, you could do whatever the heck you want.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it a regret, but the only thing that I think about is like, if I had gone to school, like I would have probably been sitting for license exams like now, like after like a 5-year track. So, I do.
But like, you also have to take the perspective of like most people who are 23 at this point are living at home and still trying to find a job.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to set you back. Like it's one of those things where if that's what you want, like the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. And I don't feel like at this point you're really going to be setting yourself back that much. It's almost like slowing down to speed up.
Yeah. And I'm very fortunate.
I was going to say, go ahead, finish.
No, so I was just going to say I'm fortunate too, because on the construction side, I actually have a small team that like supports the day to day. So like if I've had to go away or step away for a few days, or if I'm slammed with design, I don't have to worry about like the day to day ops at all. Like right now, like I'm still very, very involved, but I have an excellent office manager / like operations person and like an awesome PM too. So like it's not like if I were to do spend more time on design, I would be necessarily lacking in the other area. So I've got that aspect that I'm grateful for.
The registered architect is an interesting conversation because, correct me if I'm wrong, Ethan, but in order to become registered, not only do you need to go to school, but you also need to work under another firm for I mean, a couple thousand hours. Isn't that
Yeah,
accurate?
I think it's 3,000 hours.
So, and there's, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of guys face, and which is why you hear, I'm not an architect, I'm an architectural designer, is because someone similar to yourself, 23 years old, you started designing homes in high school, you get out, you're already in a successful path. Why would you then take, quote unquote, a step back to go work for someone just to fulfill the obligation of the 3,000 hours? And
Yeah,
I always found that part, like, I'm not an architect, but I always found that part frustrating for those that I know aren't architects, because they went on to be uber successful, but they just weren't able to check that box ever.
right.
But I think I can sympathize with you in terms of like where you're at, and trying, as Tyler, you just said, like trying to slow down to speed up. It's, you have all these good things going. And Ethan, you came out to our Needham project, and I know we walked around for an hour or something like this, and we talked a lot about
Mhm.
what we're chatting about now. But it's challenging, because you have all of these great opportunities, and to let go of one, it's almost like you don't know if you let go of one, are you letting go of the right one? Like, which one is about to, quote unquote, pop off? It's like, well, if I
Right.
go all in on building, like maybe I was a week away from, being, on a crazy path with architecture. Um, and Jeff Sweener was talking about this. It's, I think last week or the week before, and just saying, imagine if you did put all your focus on one thing, and how much further along you'd be in your business. And and him and Tyler look at me and like, we're talking to you, and I'm like, I know, but there's opportunity that I see with many things, and for me to give up one opportunity to go all in on another, while it might be, quote unquote, right, it's still difficult for me to comprehend that, because I think that, while I'm young or younger, I think that I should spread it out, and keep trying to push all the balls forward. And at some point, maybe I don't.
Yeah, it's tough not to. And I think in my case, like the you know the design is would be really tough to give up because it's just me. There's like literally no overhead, and it's like it's just my time to do, and it's lucrative. And then so that makes me think, well, maybe I should just design. But then it's like I have such a passion for the construction at the end of the day that it's
Mm-hmm.
like I can't give that up. So then I'm back to, we got to do both. Um, and then of course I've thought, this was a question I was going to ask you guys, like how your goals have changed over time from when you started your businesses to now. Because, I think when I maybe started like 5 years ago, I'm like, I want to grow my construction company to be like Suffolk or something. And then I experience like how hard it actually is. And then I'm like, well, I think building 2 homes a year would be fine as well. But like
Yeah, right.
the ambition is
It's like
still
when you
there.
start thinking about how many kids you want to have, at least for me. I was like, I could have a bunch of kids. And then I had one kid. I was like, I could definitely just have one kid.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
we settled on two.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just tough.
I mean, there's a few things at your age, like you're so young, you have so much energy, you're so passionate about what you're doing, and it's all so new to you that like you're taking it in and you want more and you want more. There's going to be a point where there's other priorities and other things in your life that slide in that you want to be able to pull away from that some, and you want, like, maybe you don't want to be doing both, maybe you want to be able to hand something over. So it's, I don't think that you have to hang on the fact that you're like, I need to do both of these things and I need to do them now, because I'm not sure that that's always going to be the case. It may be, but it may not be. Like at this point in your life, are you married or anything?
No, not yet.
So, like, all of you is probably going into this. And like, I did the same thing. And I would assume that Nick probably did the same thing, where so much of your fulfillment in life, so much of your gratification, so much of your self-worth is manifesting itself through these things that you're doing right now. But there might come a point in your life 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where like it's not just revolving around this. And I think creating a dynamic income and business model and plan that affords you an ability to not have to rely on your entire identity being these two things is probably a good path to at least aim for as well, where it's like, you know, this may not always be it for me. This may not be everything that I find value in. As you get older, as you possibly get married, have kids, have a family, there may be things that mean more to you than this down the road.
Yeah, definitely. And you make a good point that, the priorities, probably will shift over time, from what they are now. So not attaching myself so much to that, would be wise in the long run.
And I also think that like as you get older, you become more efficient, your business becomes more efficient. I think that like we're all trying to make more money, not necessarily just to say that we make more money, but life becomes more expensive. You have different tastes, things cost more money. And I it's not that you want to work less, but you try and find opportunities within your career to maximize your profitability with the least amount of work that you're putting into it. And that's not, again, that's not like the least amount of effort, but what requires the least from you. And like if going and getting your degree and putting that time in up front makes your design process that much more lucrative with less time invested, like that might end up being a worthy venture down the road. I don't know what that looks like on your end, where it's like, if I get my degree or not, I'm pretty much making the same amount of money. And then it's like, all right, well, that might be a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think it would definitely pay off, not only in the knowledge, but just in the legitimacy of being an actual architect. I think
Yeah.
you can get higher end jobs and bring that knowledge to the table that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. But going back to like what's important over time, like I think when I started, I like put like making money on this pedestal, and of course, like we all want to make money, but and it's not to say like we've had a couple projects that we've done well on, and we come to the end and we close on it, and I've experienced an interesting feeling where it's like kind of a sense of like emptiness that the project is over, and despite maybe making a good profit on it, it's like that actually wasn't what I was going after.
Yeah.
I think experiencing that a time or two has made me kind of shift my thinking a little bit to, what else is important. And I think for me, that's been like, trying to put out a good product and maybe doing like what's fulfilling day to day, instead of like just putting like the goal of like making a lot of money on a pedestal.
I mean, also what you're proud of on a day-to-day basis. Like if deep down you feel that you would have more pride in what you're doing if you had certain credentials. Maybe you go and you get your license, and it's like, well, I want to get certified in this. I want to get, because that's going to make you feel that you are the best architect that you are, whether it changes what you're doing or not. I think that there is something to be said for just like having a lot of integrity with what you're doing and feeling that you're doing right by you and all your customers.
Yeah.
You have to ask your, like, when I think of, and I'm trying to phrase this in a way that it doesn't sound like I'm being an asshole, because I promise you I'm not, but it's like, what's the angle for you with what you're doing, other than being like, hey, this may cost you a little bit less money to go with our setup versus like somebody who were licensed and 100% legit and took care of the structurals and all of that stuff. Like who's your market? What's your angle, other than like, hey, maybe your foot in the door is a little bit less?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like it hasn't. I feel like that question hasn't really been posed. I feel like I'm not in the arena of like competing with registered architects, because I think that people that want that service are getting it, and then
Yeah.
strictly draftsmen aren't in the conversation for some obvious reasons. Like, you get the legitimacy and the experience and the knowledge that comes along with that. I think it's more like fulfilling a need that I saw like in the market originally, and then it's just
Yeah.
been kind of riding that since.
And that market was spec builders originally looking to just refine their design, right? Like basically take what they were doing and improving upon it.
Um, I would like to say that it was more like architecturally driven, and I've definitely had some great clients that allow me to like express my creativity.
Mm-hmm.
More homeowner clients in that regard, but a lot of it was definitely more of a drafting need, honestly, than a
Mm-hmm.
design
Yeah.
need. Those are two separate things. One of
Yeah.
them is to get a permit, and then the other one is to create a product that looks good and functions well. So I've been fortunate to have a handful of projects in which I can really, design and then draft what I designed. But, builders doing a spec product, they really just need something drafted that they know what it costs for their permit.
So how, being that it hasn't been that long that you've been doing this, like how did you generate and develop what you're charging, what your price point is? Are you going to market and saying like this is what market rate is? If it were a licensed architect, this is what my deliverables are. Like how are you understanding that you're in the realm of where you should be?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story. How I kind of started in this was when I was 12, my parents got me Chief Architect software because they noticed that I
Sick.
liked, playing around with SketchUp and stuff. So for my 12th birthday, they got me Chief Architect. And so I would like see a cool house, take a picture of it, try to model it, and then I would just like keep doing that. And then eventually I would like, look at the real estate listings and stuff. And what I saw was a lot of
Can't believe you're not married yet. This is mind blowing.
so what I saw was like a bunch of new construction home listings using like 2D black and white front elevations of the plans for marketing, and I'm like, I'm essentially rendering these homes anyways. Like, why don't I try to get into like real estate agents to like, hey, I can produce you a rendering to use for your marketing instead of like a 2D black and white elevation. So what I started doing was going to open houses and trying to talk to real estate agents and saying, hey, $250, I can render this up.
And you're like 12 or 13 at this point or older?
This is probably like early high school at this point.
Okay.
I think I could drive.
So
So,
okay.
but so like kind of in between, I think like probably a little before high school, I started doing some internships for builders and realizing that was like another path too. But so I started with like doing the renderings and stuff for agents, and then somehow I stumbled across that our town has like online permitting. And so I think I was looking up like what's the building code or something, like some kind of question. And I stumbled across like the town of Easton building department. And then it was like view issued permits here. So like I clicked on that, but all the permits had attachments with all the plans being submitted. And so I just started like studying plans, but these were like real permit sets. Um, so then that's how I started like studying, well, what goes into a permit set, like what gets documented. And of course I'm studying, Easton's a nice town, but it's nothing, too crazy. So it's a lot of like mid-range or average product with some nicer stuff, sprinkled in. And so I was getting a glimpse of what like plan sets looked like. Um, but then I clicked on a project, in the builder had accidentally uploaded his architect's invoice as one of the attachments, and it was for like $1,300. And so I was
This is
like,
how you developed your pricing?
yeah, I guess.
I can't. I like. Is it? I understand that you can go to the building department and get this stuff, but like, Is it legit that that's just like you are going to do a renovation on your house
Yeah.
and you can just find the plans online?
Tyler, listen to me. Ethan and I are DMing 2 weeks ago, and he's chatting about our white oak project. And I was like, wait till you see the details. I screenshot the drawing and I sent it to him. He goes, I already saw these. I said, what do you mean you already saw them? He goes, I already studied the plans on Wellesley's website. I'm like, what? And I immediately I sent Vincent a text. I'm like, this dude is legit. Like this is the this is someone that's cut from the same cloth as myself, Tyler, someone like Vincent. It's like, because you are so committed to understanding it, and you've always obviously, like, you're talking about being 15, 16 years old, showing up at an open house, telling a real estate agent, hey, I'll render this for you and you're going to pay me money. Like that, like you've always been resourceful, but the fact that you quote unquote stumbled across the permit portal to then go and study, I'm sure, hundreds of permit sets of drawings, it is one thing. With that, but what I find the most funny is that you've also you stumbled across an invoice, and this is how you've built your your pricing strategy. I mean, it's awesome. And like, I think that story alone is what anyone that's listening to this that is struggling to find the information on how to do something, there you go. It's like you just go and you go find out where that information lies and you study it.
Yeah, and it's funny because Easton was the only town around that had online permitting. Like, I looked up all the other surrounding towns and nobody had it. So could I have gone to the building?
Yeah, back
maybe?
then, yeah.
But now, like, all the towns have it. So, like, to this day, I'll go on, and that's how I study to try to refine how my sets look. And I'm not so much looking at like design. I'm looking at how are they documenting information, because that's just like, I would say, a passion of mine is like, when I draw a set of plans, how can I convey the information in the best possible way? And to me, that's like making the drawings as clear and concise as I can. And that's evolved over time. So if you look at like the first set that I did compared to now, it's like a world of difference, because I've been able to see like other examples and then try to mimic the drafting look. So I guess back to, the original story was, I saw that invoice, and then I was talking to my parents, and I previously I had like mowed lawns. That's how I had saved money. And I said to my dad, I'm like, here's an invoice for $1,300. That's what this guy's paying for a set of plans. I'm like, I can upgrade my Chief Architect software to have the ability to produce documents like this, and it's $2,500 like one time. And he's like, that's a no-brainer. Like, absolutely do it, and sell 2 plans and cover it. So that's what I did. I think that was in I think I was probably like 17 at that time. And then I think like maybe a year later, I had sold like my first like permit set.
For how much?
Trying to find Nick's plans online right now.
Are you really?
Yeah.
I
I've already seen them.
I wouldn't even know how.
I'm just curious as to like how difficult it would. Like, is this a pretty difficult process? Applications, license, and permits.
God, now everyone's gonna be stealing my plans. You know how many people?
It's all right.
You know how many people listen to this podcast? They're going to crash the Wellesley website.
Just for a little bit less.
A little bit less, you asshole. How much did you sell your first set of permit drawings for? Do you know?
I want to say like $1,000.
Yeah, a little bit less.
A little bit less. But of course, over time, that's developed, and I think I always have tried to be like the lesser option, because I wanted the work and I wanted the experience. But I think more recently I've found a good niche of builders. Ironically, there's a few in Needham. I've been doing a lot more work there, and it's still a spec product, but I'm able to draw a little bit, bigger of a house and spend some more time on it and charge more for it. And I think that they see the value, because I'm also bringing, I think the value proposition for that specific client is that the design is better than what they're used to getting for a spec house. so now it's turning into, okay, well, the design is a little bit better and I can charge for that. So I've tried to hone in more on that type of client and then do less of kind of like the Easton spec permit set, but I still do those, to pay the bills because it's kind of been my bread and butter.
Do you feel as though you've ever like peaked in creativity on a project? And I don't mean like that you can't get better. I guess what I'm asking is, have you ever done a project where you've put 100% of your creativity into it and not have been held back?
No, I think that there's always compromise or parameters to follow. So I feel that, um, I probably could have gone further, whether that's in like, specifying like, exterior, like millwork decisions, like the rake detail or something like that. Um, I don't
You're
feel
not
that
doing that.
I'm not doing that. A lot of that is left up to the builder still.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's my goal would be to do that, and to learn more about it. But honestly, um, if I was given full reign, I don't know if I would be at that point yet.
Because you don't have a full understanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just because I'm still learning, and I think
Yeah.
it's gradual, and I think that, I'm kind of a believer that like you get the opportunities that you're kind of like ready for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's incremental. And you do a little more on one, and then you can kind of prove that, and then like you kind of work your way up. So, I think that I used to think that parameters from clients, were like a bad thing, and like if I could just draw plans with no client, that it would be a dream. And I've actually found that when I try to sit down and draw something, I actually get stuck because there's not like those parameters like a good challenge to solve, and it actually forces creativity. And I've
Mm-hmm.
found that especially as my business develops, I'm taking like the site into consideration way more. Like the first thing I start with is the site plan, not only
Yeah.
for zoning, but it's um, like without that, like the site and the zoning dictates the design. Um,
It's
so
funny. I've had that conversation with Vincent, and we have another property that we're considering doing a spec on. And I'm like, I just need a like, what are you envisioning here? He goes, dude, I don't know. I'm like, well, you got to have some idea. He goes, no, I mean, I need the topo, I need the site plan, I need to lay all this out. I'm like, I know,
yeah,
but like, what do you think it might look like? And then I pushed, and I remember doing that with White Oak, and because I am someone that if you give me a blank sheet of paper and say draw me a house, I wouldn't be able to do it, like under
Yeah.
any circumstance.
You
And
need
I
some
think
constraints.
yeah, and I find it so impressive when someone just sits down and can just sketch up a house, like Teak, right? Steve, when
mm-hmm.
he was on. I tell the story a lot, but he was on site when we first introduced the Needham project, and he stood on that sidewalk and he literally just looked at the lot and he sketched a house. And I asked him for it. I'm hoping he saved it. He sketched a house on his iPad that is quite literally exactly what we built. First
Yeah,
shot. And I'm like, but like I'm like looking at him like, where did that come from? And for me, I'm way more. You give me a house, I will spend a year fine tuning every minor detail, even the one that doesn't matter. Like that's what I like. That's where my strength is. But I cannot work from just blankness. And but hearing you say it out loud, and it makes a lot more sense. Where it's and I've actually seen the behind the scenes of Vincent designing, where I realized that it quite literally starts with the site plan, and then you just figure out the massing, and that's just the shape of the house. And it's like, okay, it's an L shape, but we didn't know that there was a underground garage, or that it was 2 stories, or that it was hip roof, or whatever. And then it started to evolve, and then you start realizing, okay, well, how many bedrooms do we need? How do we fit those into this? Um, and like watching that process happen is super interesting. And I think
For
good.
for the record, you can't find stuff like this down near us,
Are you
like
looking
on
at
the
my,
town.
my
Yeah,
oh yeah.
it's legitimate, like everything.
For me?
Yeah, even to like your insurance binder.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's crazy. Doug, you can feel free to
I was
cut this.
I was gonna say, Doug, you're gonna have to bleep all this.
That's crazy though. Yeah, you can't. That not near us.
Some, yeah. We'll see how this plays out. The I lost my train of thought. Um,
Basically how you're creating the development and the design of the house from nothing, and like starting from the massing, and then how many
yeah,
bedrooms you need, and just
and
like
and
building on that.
and I think my last point on that was I think that sometimes clients don't really understand the iterative process of creativity, right? Um, and if you were to look, they were so I don't think it's secret, but like Vincent and his team worked through Miro. It's a whiteboard app, and I got invited to it, and so I could check in and see progress. And I had notifications turned on, so I get an email saying like so and so is in the Miro board updating drawings. So I would sit there and watch them live,
That's cool.
and it was super cool, but it was crazy because it it was every little thing that they were like, all right, we got the shape. Now where do we put the garage? All right, let's put it under.
Yeah.
No, that looks like shit. Don't do this. Don't. And you'd see like 16 versions of how the driveway entered the garage. And then when they proposed it and they were like, hey, we want to review the driveway, I'd let them do their spiel. I'd be like, yeah, I watched you guys do that live. Like, so show, but what they proposed and what they shared made sense. And if I hadn't seen the behind the scenes, I would have been like, well, there is no other option. What do you mean there was 16 other like that? No, this is the only one that makes sense.
Right.
And I think that's lost in communication for a lot of clients because they don't, it's hard to communicate, all of those steps in order to get to that final result, especially when you're talking about really custom projects, right? And
I think that's also the issue, that like it's not oftentimes done like that. It's a design completely independent of the space, the location, the lot, what's around it. It's just it works on paper, when in actuality, like it's all of the site constraints and the house constraints that really make that like a unique custom project. And those challenges, I feel, bring, usually, if you're afforded the opportunity and the time, create the best products, because they are so tough to design, and the unique challenges present like unique opportunities for architecture.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something I've realized too is like, because I have a service business. I think that anytime that I might be, working with somebody else to provide either me or my company a service, I'm not a very good client because I'm not used to knowing how to express like those parameters to shape the project in a meaningful way. So I actually, would tip my hat to Nick in like knowing what you would want for parameters of like not compromising on white oak. Like I feel like that would be tough for me to kind of imagine that and then, communicate it in a meaningful way that could help, the design team shape the vision.
I don't know if I can take any credit of that. We had multiple conversations. I mean, one specifically, like the siding material or cladding material. He came into that meeting very early and he said, hey, I have a crazy idea, but I have a fallback if you're not up for it. I said, okay. And he pitched me on using the Peterson. By the way, it's not Peterson Teagle. And someone ripped me apart on YouTube. They're like, I cannot believe this idiot calls it Teagle. It's just teal, and it means brick in Danish. Or yeah, it's Danish for brick. So the Peterson Teal product, just to clarify, and he pitches me on it, and he walks me through it. I'm like, oh, that's super interesting. And then he's like, he shows me the Vincent Van Dusen house down in the Hamptons. I'm like, holy shit, like that's really cool. And he's like, but it's, probably super expensive, and this is roughly what we think it will cost. So here's the version of it in cedar. And I don't know if he did it on purpose or not, but like the cedar renderings, I'm like, this isn't nearly as cool. And and these are wildly underwhelming. And I was like, let's just do it. He's like, are you sure? I'm like, no, I'm not sure. But we're the whole point of this is an uncompromised project, and my job is to fulfill that. I've talked about this before, but like there's deeper meaning as to why we're building this project. So it wasn't really me, guiding any of those compromises. It was just allowing the creative, in this case, Vincent and his team and Vincenzo, to design something that worked within the parameters that we were given. And my role was really just, unless it was unnecessary, or was an easy swap to something else that fulfilled our ethos on the project, it was just always an automatic yes. Which gives me heartburn, but that's okay.
I'm trying to figure out what your definition of unnecessary is.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Tyler's reading the drawings. He's like, I don't see anything in here unnecessary.
I closed them out. There's too many pages for me to read through. It was too in depth. But no, like, even as far as, I think that like that iterative process is so similar to our building process as well, right? Where it's like customers don't understand, and even as being a builder or a carpenter, I didn't always and still don't always understand what that process looks like. It's not until you start with step 1 and then step 2 presents itself and step 3 then makes more sense. And it's like, okay, now I can see how to get to the finish line. But it's oftentimes it's that first move, which may or may not be right. You may end up ripping that first move out, but even that mistake leads you in the direction of where your project is intended to be. And I think that sometimes we have to educate our customers and ourselves on that it's like, you just have to get moving and start it. And there's going to be things that you're happy with and things that you fucking hate, but that's going to drive you towards the finish line.
Yeah. I've kind of found, I've come to rely on the iterative process a little bit more as I've kind of learned more and drawn more. Because it's like, I know I'm not going to get it right on the first try, like working through design development. And of course, these aren't, massively long projects. I might, have a week or two to do design development on a smaller spec home. So I know I'm not going to get it right the first time, and that's fine, because I can kind of just like leave it be and let it kind of work in my mind. And then when I come back to it and it clicks, like that part is really rewarding. And it kind of gives me more confidence moving forward to like, again, it's if it's not great on the first try, that's fine. I'm just going to let it sit, and the answers will kind of present themselves.
Yeah, there's been very few times in my career that there's either been a mistake or something that's been done, or even just showing up and not understanding how I was going to do something, that we weren't able to determine a pretty good solution to it. Sometimes the like quote unquote fix being better than the initial plan, design or goal in the first place. And like, I look back at jobs that I would do when I first started, and I would be so anxious about starting that job that I would basically script the entire job on paper and how everything was going to go. And then I would go in, I would start tearing the job apart, and it would be completely different than what I anticipated. And I would have to just design on the fly and figure it out on the fly how to get there. And it wasn't until a certain amount of years under my belt that I was confident and comfortable enough to go into a project and be like, all right, I know what I want it to end looking like, and I'll be fine getting there without having every single stage of this process scripted out, because it generally doesn't go that way.
Right.
Usually it goes the opposite way. The construction, the GC side of your business, do you feel that you're serving somewhat of the same market as the design side?
Yeah, pretty much. It's kind of like that mid-range, call it semi-custom, where they're making the decisions, but they really don't have input in like everything. Although I will say I'm building my parents' house right now, and it's kind of a different level of that where everything gets questioned, and I
Yeah.
think that it's been an amazing learning experience, and I think it'll be my best house yet. It's not the biggest, but um, it's got some awesome detail, and I think that's because it was driven by even further parameters than what I would have considered. Working with my dad on how things get aligned and finished, and just like that second set of eye for detail has been a good challenge, and like I've learned a lot about. So I almost think that like moving forward, I'm going to, even if I don't think that it might matter to a client, because there's a lot that they don't, seem um, to care about, I'm going to ask that question, because I think it can change the direction of the project for the better.
What has that process been like for your parents?
In terms of,
Just like the general experience. Like how did that come about? What's it been like? What are the challenges been like? How has it been different than your standard projects? Are you charging for that?
yeah, so basically, they purchased a second home. It was a cottage down in Plymouth, Mass, which is on the water. Um, and they had it for about 4 years, and then decided ultimately that they wanted to make that spot their primary residence. And so we had been designing. Of course, I was going to design it over the past few years and playing around with stuff. And then ultimately they decided that it was time. So we tore down the existing cottage that was there. And it's a small lot. It's only 50 feet wide by 100 feet deep. And it's in like a small lot residential zoning near the water. So, first it started with a lot of zoning and permitting stuff, but we got what we wanted to do, approved by right. And then the pre-con was a little bit different, because obviously, we sat and we built the budget out together, which isn't, we don't do that with our clients, because,
Yeah.
not just the behind the scenes, but we're not cost plus at the moment. But of course, this job is all open book, obviously, because it's, they're funding it and everything, which is different. So, we worked through the budgeting and stuff like that. Got some bids and used some historical data from my other projects to build out the rest of the budget. And then since then, it's been very, very smooth. I would say, except for a couple trades, that I think we had a little bit of trouble with, kind of just like crews switching out, and then we lost some quality, and maybe attention to detail wasn't aligned. And I think if because my dad's kind of the driver on the project, I think if he were to do it again, he would choose a couple different subs to use, differently. That maybe instead of an A minus, they were an A plus, because that's what he valued, and then 90% of the other ones we would have kept the same. So it's been really smooth. I mean, it's a 2,200 square foot house, including the finished basement. We tore the existing house down on November 1st of last year, and we're 2 weeks out from a CO. So we're about, I think, 7.5 months, and it is truly custom. Like everything was considered, and it's not that it's like the highest level of finish inside, although
Yeah.
it is very nice. I think that they upgraded in areas that made sense and that delivered a lot of impact, and then saved in other areas that didn't make sense to splurge on.
What?
But
Just
go ahead.
expand on that, because I'm like, what?
Hold on, before you do that, what's your dad do for a living?
So he owns a metal fabrication shop. So, but he's always kind of been like handy,
Yeah.
you know, in like has renovated our houses growing up and stuff. So it's just him and a partner. They've been doing it for, I think, like 16, 17 years. And, but they do like custom, like sheet metal fabrication for commercial contractors, like a lot of ceilings and wall details and stuff. So,
So he understands.
yeah, he not only understands like the process, but also like is very precise,
Yeah.
you know. Um, in
That's just point of reference for me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and
But
so
what area? Yeah, what areas do you feel like when you say they upgraded in areas that you feel as though made sense and saved in areas that didn't? I'm curious of what those areas were.
yeah, so a few of them were like on the exterior. He was like, um, I want the front of this house to look badass, but the left side is 5 feet away from the property line. All that's going to be
Mhm.
over there is the condensers and the trash cans. Like, if we have to focus on the details of the roof returns and the gutters and like, how the reveals of the siding come together, I want to focus on the
Mhm.
front and like the
Got it.
right side where the patio is. But like, I don't care about the left side and the back. And it was
Got it.
still done well. Like we didn't
Yeah.
skimp, but it was like I think he did a good job of communicating like what was important to him. And then that's what we spent a lot of effort on. But even down to like, some of the interior stuff, I think they upgraded some of the interior millwork. So we did a lot of V-groove, like accent walls in the master and, like a white oak beam on the ceiling, um, a flush entry shower, stuff like that, that isn't a crazy cost. But like I said, it kind of like ties it all together and produces like a better interior design. But then we went with a stock cabinet because they're just like, I think we'll build one more house, but this isn't like we don't need to spend crazy money on cabinets on this project. It's not up there on the priority list for us in this location. So it was kind of a mix of like, how does this pencil in the long run versus like how are we going to enjoy the space in the next, probably 5 to 10 years. And I think that they did it in a smart way.
I think that presents so many challenges for building that a lot of times as a builder it's difficult, especially when you have like a certain program and a certain agenda where it's like where am I okay with cutting cost and cutting budget that it's not going to come back to bite me and it's still going to create a project that I'm proud of and that I want to be a part of, because realistically, like at the end of the day, all of what we do is contingent on what our customers are willing to spend. Like, obviously, we're doing a good job marketing ourselves and selling that, but like, we wouldn't have a good portfolio if it weren't for our customers' money.
Mm.
We're not giving everything away for free. So it's like, what can we sacrifice? What can we concede on a project that's going to still create something we can stand behind and something we're proud of and something that we're excited and fulfilled to be a part of, but also be able to really like not overspend our customers' money where it's just not necessary.
Right.
It's a really hard thing to balance. um, on top of obviously like the application and the technical side of construction, which I always felt was the easier side of things, like maintaining budget, communication, coordination, and then value engineering. To me, like that is all the difficult side of things that I people don't necessarily always hire you for, but I think is really really important when selecting a designer, selecting a builder, an architect, whatever it may be. Being able to create a product that your customers are really happy with and they're still just spending the amount they want to spend.
Well, I think to your point, Tyler, they might not be hiring you for that, but if they're not specifically hiring you for it, there is a level of expectation with it,
Yeah.
and it's like it's expected that you're on time, on budget, and that you're getting the best quality of and best products at all times. Unless otherwise stated, right? It's just like they go into it with these expectations.
So
And
weird
good.
question for you, Ethan. Like 10 years from now, you're still doing this same thing. Do you feel a customer in a job like this is where you want to be, or do you want to be in the position where it's just like, nah, I want to be doing what I want to do. Cost, I don't want to be such a driving factor in my projects, and I want to be able to design the left side of the house the same whether somebody's going to see it or not.
Yeah, definitely the latter. To the original point that I said with that, kind of mentor architect that I had met with saying, it's great that you're doing this now, but you don't want to be doing it, 20 years from now. And I think the same thing with the construction. I think that I've incrementally improved with the product and the process. And, with each one, I've learned so much. And especially on this one, just because the access to me has been different. Like, I'm not going to, talk about the project like at all hours with a typical client, but of course with my parents I will. And like that has just, opened up a level of communication and thought process that has made this project better. So yeah, to answer your question, the goal would be to keep incrementally improving, to the point where, maybe there's still a budget, because I guess, there always will be, but there is more freedom to, express the creativity and the execution level. And, maybe we can use, a higher grade of subcontractor, you know, with the design and the construction.
If you were to speak specifically about the projects, like what would be the biggest difference between now and 10 years? Like, is it, well, I'll leave the question at that. Like, what do you think physically would be the biggest difference?
I would say, I would say the budget manifested into the execution, and I feel that's probably driven by location. It's just like not something that's going to happen in certain markets, because it doesn't make sense just to some level. But like if I was in 10 years, if I was building a 2,200 square foot house that was like, to the nines, like, historically accurate, and it had like a healthy budget, and I could execute it well with like really good trade partners, like I think that would be a great goal.
So, and you would prefer to stick with these more traditional homes, right? Like when you say historically accurate, you're not saying it's historic, but you're talking about the detailing, like you were talking about earlier, the roof rake and the trim around, a roof line. There's the guys that see what, hey, put crown going up and do this and do that, but they don't understand the premise as to why the crown molding goes up the roof and how that intersects when you hit the fascia and how you need to have different spring angles and all that. Like there's theory behind it. Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. And I'm glad you used the word theory, because that's what I think I would learn if I got that formal education. In could I learn it through trial and error? I think yes, but it would take much longer. And yeah, I think I always, my default is to kind of prefer the historical, stuff. I grew up, I mean, Easton is got a ton of history, and, I don't know if this is related, but the house I grew up in was, I think, built in like 1907, all the original woodwork, the exterior was kind of restored. And, I think that has manifested itself into kind of like the style that I prefer. And I think that it's tough to replicate those details nowadays with what pencils on paper. So, that would be part of my goal, was like to have a large enough budget or in a location that it does make sense to do so.
It's funny. One of the reasons why I think some of this stuff doesn't pencil on paper is because we've created replicas of what once was out of materials that are expensive.
Modern farmhouse, bro.
Can't end this podcast on modern farmhouse.
No, that's where I believe the degree or the license doesn't necessarily matter as much as the opportunity that may present itself throughout that journey, where it's like you may be able to work underneath a more respected architect while going through that program or while chasing that license than in the situation where you are now. And like you have to weigh those investments. And that's not to say that you can't get there without doing so. But I think that like whether you have a license and a degree that says you're a legitimate architect or not, I don't think you're going to learn that much more than what you're doing now. I would say at 23, like your trajectory being responsible for the company, the design, and owning as much as you do, you're learning way more and you're retaining way more than just going to school for it. You just have to weigh out like what opportunities will present themselves that will be different. And I think that there is the big question. I'm not sure that you'll really be learning much more than you already are learning at this point.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with that. But I guess it's, it does kind of come back to that theory piece. And it's not to say that they're going to teach exactly what I want to do in school, but I think it's more of like that base knowledge that you can build upon in that practice, like you're saying, under an architect, that you can, gain the experiences and the opportunities of to try and like get to where you want to get to, through that path. So, but yeah,
Where
go ahead.
where would you want to go? I know we had Brandon Ingram on. He's like, there's two schools that teach traditional architecture in the country, like one or two at this point. Did you have something in mind?
I think for, convenience, Boston Architectural College has been, what I had in mind. They offer a program in which you can take classes at night and then get your practice hours during the day, so that by the time you finish a 5 years, undergrad plus a master's, you can sit for a licensing exam.
Yeah.
And that's pretty unique. And then I feel that, kind of like the traditional design experience would come, I would want to, get my practice hours in a firm that, believes in that as well.
I think also it like don't lose sight of the fact that like where you are and what you're able to do now, essentially just drafting, is probably more complex than 75% of the country and licensed architects and what they are doing. Like growing up where you did and in the area where you are, and really the push and demand for classic traditional quality architecture is so strong that like even looking through your portfolio and you're like, yeah, we're doing mid-level semi-custom, what you're able to do in the market that you are is already leaps and bounds above so many other areas in the country, that you shouldn't lose sight of that, because I guarantee that there's licensed architects in many other states and areas that are like, holy shit, if I had an opportunity to design what they're designing as a draftsman, I'd crap my pants. So don't lose sight of where you are and what you're doing at 23, and like make sure that you're not always living so far beyond your years that you're not appreciating what's right in front of you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, to your earlier point, like our portfolios are kind of, derived from what our clients are going to spend. So I'm, just grateful that I've had like enough opportunity to kind of, express that creativity in experiment even, on trying to incrementally build my portfolio. And it's all because of, opportunities that clients have given me, I guess, aside from the couple of specs that we've done. But even so, that's on somebody else's dime that I'm able to learn and kind of express that.
I'm gonna have to send you a customer of mine who wants like a kitchen and a small addition. Said that they have a draftsman that would do the plans for them, and we're on like third round of plans, and it still is it's one page like
What?
nut. Oh my god, it's honestly. I was like, I can't send this to subcontractors. Like, if I send this to subcontractors, what I'm going to get back is probably nothing or even worse. And it's not comprehensive. It's not accurate. It's basic. He's like, this should be good to submit for permits, and I'm like, absolutely not. It will not be at all. Um, I'll send you what I have from like what a draftsman would get us in our area, and I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised with the opportunity that you have.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone that uses Skype anymore, Ethan.
Yeah, I don't know. This might be on my end.
No, it's definitely on your end.
There's a big TV in here.
I haven't heard that noise in so long.
Dude, it's the partner with the leather office chair. He's using Skype.
Ethan, my last question for you. You say that you don't do specs. Would you do another one?
I would. I mean, the way that it's currently structured is that my partner funds it, and I think that I like to say that I'm a steward of his money when we do that. But I think that I would feel different about it if it was my own money, because I think that everybody has a different risk tolerance, and I think some opportunities have come up where it's like, as a company, we could do a spec house. And then I think, well, would I be okay parting with the cash? And then I'm like, I don't know if I would be. I would. I think that if it were to go south to some extent, it wouldn't be worth it at the time for me. I would rather just keep drawing and keep building custom, to the point where I was a little bit more insulated to make better decisions with that.
All right. Fair enough. All right, dude. Yep. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad things are going well. And I didn't realize Plymouth was your parents' house. I'm going to have to, I had been following it. I'm going to take a closer look at it, especially if it's going to be your best product ever. And if I'm ever down there, I'll have to hit you up and swing on by.
Not ever, just to date.
Yeah. To date. So far. Fair
He's
enough.
not peaking yet, man.
No.
Not at 23, you better
not
not
at 23.
It's gonna be a long life.
Right.
But although you've been doing this for like a dozen years at this point.
A dozen.
I've been doing this for over half my life. That's what I would tell people. Then you show up and you're 23 and they're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
That's the point, right? All right, man. Well, I appreciate
We appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to meet you.
You too. All right, I'll see you.
23, man. I love his story about like working in high school.
I only have the small thumbnail up. And like, I mean, he looks older than 23. He doesn't look that old.
He's very mature. I didn't
think he was incredibly what?
Tall.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like he met me on the job site, and every time I see him, I'm like, man, I forget how tall you are.
Yeah, but I like didn't assume that he was that young.
Yeah.
I thought he was going to be like in his 30s with like a family, and he's like, yeah, I can't go back to school now. It's like 23. You can do whatever the hell you want.
Like without me thinking about it or doing math, like I would consider him to be a similar age as myself, but I'm 13 years older than him, which
I know, that's crazy.
Fucking weird. But it's funny because it's funny that he talks about his parents getting him chief architect for his birthday, because ever since I was 10 years old, I would always ask for tools for Christmas from my parents or from Santa. And I would I remember I actually still have the first yellow 25-foot extension cord that I ever got.
Really?
It wrapped up under the tree, and I was so excited. And and I got a hard hat. I don't have that anymore. But my point is I actually remember I had a friend that lived up the street from me, and she wanted to be an architect, and like we would always talk about how she was going to be an architect, I was going to be a builder and build her houses. But I don't remember what program it was, because it was way before chief architect. But there was another architecture program that you would design in 3D, and it would create 2D drawings. And we would meet up and we would design houses. And like she would design them, and I would be like, no, move this, make the roof like
Yeah.
that. They would never like it was, but that was what we would do for fun. Which
Yeah.
when you were like, oh, no wonder you're not married yet. I was like, man, I mean, I'm not married.
So I've been to, it's funny because my one buddy who's a landscape designer, he like has always just been into that stuff, but like actually loves the landscaping aspect of it too. And he always will send me pictures. He's like, my first leaf blower, and he's like 9 with a corded leaf blower on. Like this stuff that he would ask for. Got like a weed whacker for his birthday when he was 11. I was like, you are so weird. What 11-year-old kid wants like a leaf blower for his birthday when you're, and at this point now I can relate it so well because my kids are around that age. Or even like Ethan, 23 was when I got done college and had started my business. And I'm like, damn, could you imagine being at this point? Like we're not even in the same league when I was 23 and when he's 23 doing what he's doing. It's nuts.
Yeah. No, all the power to him. And I mean, like I said, I sympathize with him just not wanting to give one up, because they're both going well. And I think that's, the problem when things are going well. It's like you just want to keep pushing everything forward.
It's also hard to really understand big picture when you're only 23. Like you feel, I can recall 23 being the age, and the way everyone's like, what age do you think you should be able to get tattooed? And I equate that to like 23 is the first year that I feel as though you can make decisions. You're mature enough to make decisions that affect your entire life. And I always just equated that to 23, where it's like, okay, I was finally ready to get good tattoos and not make dumb life decisions when I was 23. Everything before 23 was a terrible decision. And like, that's the age that sticks out to me as being like the beginning of adulthood, getting out of adolescence.
All right, guys. Well, we appreciate you listening. As always, head over to moderncraftsman.co. I think we mentioned it last episode, but Tyler and I, we have some cool stuff we're working on in the background, and we want to get you on our email list to make sure that you guys get first dibs on it. So if you head over to moderncraftsman.co, you'll get a little pop-up. Just enter your email, and then we'll send you an introduction email, and we'll keep you informed as we develop this stuff. And then secondly, September, Contractor Coalition Summit. Tyler, you are officially joining the crew.
My picture and bio is on the website as of today.
As of today.
Yeah, I was speaking to Morgan earlier, and she's like, "Is this bio good?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I need a different picture." And then like an hour later, it was up and running.
Oh, she doesn't waste any time.
Dude, apparently not.
No, I got the text and they were like, "Hey, Tyler's in. Are you guys good with that?" I'm like, "Yeah." We've been talking about this for 2 years now. So
yeah.
September, let me get the dates real quick. If first and foremost, Tyler, you came to Minnesota, I think you know this, but that was literally our most successful event ever. And
not because of me.
Well, you may have had something to do with it. But we're already 30% sold out for September. So it's the weekend of September 26th, 27th, 28th. And it's going to be held here in Boston. We do have tickets up for sale. You do want to register, even if you're registering and paying later. But we are going to be touring some of my personal projects, including the White Oak project, the day before. So if you guys are interested in joining us, head over to contractorcoalitionsummit.com. We'll also keep a link in the bio below. and join myself, Tyler, Brad, and Morgan, and 29 other amazing individuals and all the vendors and everyone else.
Yeah, I don't know what dates you just said. I feel like they were close, but it's the 27th through the 30th. I feel like you
It
just said the
is.
26th,
I did. And I
right?
had
So,
yeah, you know
well, it's
what?
on the website, but at least
It's on the
it's the
website.
27th
But
through the 30th.
yeah,
Um,
the 26th, I said, and that was because that's the date that we're doing the home tours.
yeah.
I
So,
believe. Am I wrong on
two
that?
things. No, 26th.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
So
27th is the home tour. Wow.
okay.
We're good.
So what I would say, two things. One, from being at the last event. Well, one, I don't know when it's going to come out, but if you go on the midweek and either check out the blog post or listen to blog number 60 or podcast 66, I just recorded it. It's a recap of um my experience at the Minnesota Coalition, because that's the first one I had been to. So if you want to get my opinion of that and the takeaways from that, check out podcast 66 from the midweek. But also, I spoke with Morgan today for like an hour. And one of the big takeaways for me was just like the amount of people who were there who were comfortable with each other. And it's the same thing we spoke with Jeff last week, just being able to let your guard down and be vulnerable and ask questions. I would say that so much of that is due to people getting to know themselves at the home tours and the walkthroughs and the events before the event. So you're not going in and then sitting down to these business discussions without really knowing anyone around you. So I think that there's so much value in getting there early and going to these tours and meeting everyone before the event. With the ticket price and everything else, like that is going to create such a better experience for you and bring so
Yeah.
much more value. It's, to me, it's like the round table before the event. It would definitely behoove you to get there and start meeting everyone and networking and really just letting your guard down so that you can 100% be you before the event. So that would be my recommendation.
I like that. I got a lot to live up to, though, because when we toured Mark Williams' project, he toured a potential client before we showed up and after we showed up. So I'm going to have to somehow one-up him with our home tours this year. As
You
always,
could do
guys,
it.
we appreciate you listening. Thanks to our sponsors, Andersen Windows, Buildertrend, and we will talk to you next week.
See ya.